I think if I was going to describe this last 7 years and put a title on that speech that the governor is using as a swan song, I would describe it as the decade of missed opportunities. History will judge us by our actions, not our words. While the governor was bending over backwards to pat himself on the back, we've lived through the past 7 years, and we know what's really happening in our state. We've seen a whole city be poisoned by lead-contaminated water. 2 years ago, Governor Snyder promised that he would dedicate the remainder of his term to restoring Flint. He has still failed to gain trust in my city, and there's still a lot of work to do. In the classrooms, we've seen Michigan kids fall further and further behind. We used to be leaders in education, but now we're shortchanging our kids and expecting teachers to do more with less. Every day we see crumbling roads on our way to work. They've talked about this magical roads plan, but the reality is that our roads are going to be even worse in 10 years. Let me say that again, even worse in 10 years. The fixes are going to cost more, and you're still going to be paying more in taxes and in registration fees. We've seen the profits before people philosophy bring us one crisis after the next, like thousands being wrongly accused of unemployment fraud and abuse at the Grand Rapids Veterans Home. And the list goes on and on. We've done a lot of work in this legislature to bring jobs back to Michigan, but that work isn't worth anything if we don't have folks ready to fill those jobs. We need to seriously commit to making sure people have access to the education and training necessary to be good candidates for these jobs. We also have to attract and retain talent. And one of the ways we can do that is by protecting prevailing wage. Here's what we know. Bottom line, governing has failed. The governor's balance sheet approach has been more important than poison kids in my community, more important than safe roads and bridges, and more important than even a meaningful tax break. How can we expect a brighter tomorrow if we have toxic drinking water? If we cut corners on educating our children, allow roads to crumble and fail to promise good-paying jobs. The Republicans love to refer to the previous decade as the lost decade. Well, I think we can all refer to this decade as the decade of missed opportunities. And the only way forward is to rebuild. The next decade, together, will be the decade of rebuilding. We will rebuild our roads, bridges, and water infrastructure. We will rebuild our educational systems, both in the skilled trades and the college prep programs. It's time for Michigan to be the best again. And we're only going to get there if we start putting people first. Now I'll turn it over to Leader Singh. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Ananich, and appreciate my colleagues from both the House and Senate being with us tonight. You know, what I found during the speech was that there was a disconnect between the Michigan that the governor was speaking of and the Michigan that people feel. I think many of you saw a poll that came out today, I think it was by the Detroit News, that said that 60% of Michiganders don't feel that the economy has gotten better under this governor, or it's worse. 60% of our state doesn't feel that the economy has worked for them, and it hasn't worked under the governor's leadership over the last 7 years. So where is that disconnect? We heard a lot of platitudes about what has happened under the legislature on the Republican side, but when 60% of your public doesn't feel like the economy is working for them, that they haven't seen that success, that their young people haven't seen the success in their schools, that they haven't been able to afford college, there is something wrong. And so I hope that as we take this last year of the governor, that we are willing to work across the aisle with Republicans, Democrats, Independents, to make sure that these areas that haven't been addressed over the last 7 years get addressed. And if they won't do it this year, then we'll make sure that in November of 2018 that we change the leadership here in Lansing, so it's somebody who will actually get those things done. Senator Ananich talked about some of those items. Right last week, we had business leaders and education leaders come up with an education report that showed that we're underfunding all of our schools by $2,000 per pupil. That's not just in urban communities, that's in rural communities, that's in suburban communities, that's every school district across the state. That wasn't even addressed during tonight. We did not hear from him about the $4 billion that his own infrastructure task force said needs to be invested on an annual basis to make sure that our roads are fixed, to make sure our bridges are safe, to make sure that our water systems are safe. Where was that conversation? And then obviously one of the things that I was most disappointed in was not hearing about how he was going to fix the final pieces of the unemployment agency crisis. This was his last time to speak to the public about how to fix the issues that his administration created in Flint or at the Grand Rapids Veterans Home, but also the people that his administration wrongly accused of a crime. How do we make all of those people whole? And last December, Democrats were pushing to make sure that money was available to make sure every single one of those people was fully kept whole in this process. And that did not happen last month. And so we call again on our Republican legislators and the governor to make sure that we fix that situation. And so if we are to be successful as a state, if those 60% of Michiganders can get the things that they need, we have to focus on jobs, we have to focus on education, and the reinvestment in our infrastructure. And that's what we'll spend the next year talking about. And they can either join us or make sure that they're no longer here in the city of Lansing at the state capitol.